Liberation Day is almost here. That is what President Trump has dubbed April 2nd when he says America will get money and respect back by imposing a suite of tariffs potentially around the world. What might these tariffs hold for the U.S. economy? Joining me now is Michael Froman. He was U.S. Trade Representative for President Obama and is currently the President of the Council on Foreign Relations. Mike, welcome. I want to begin by showing a chart, just a simple chart that gives you the average tariff rate on imports to the U.S., starting in 1947 when they were about 8%. And then they go basically, it's a straight line down all the way to 2015 or so. It's under 2%. And now if you look at the proposed Trump tariffs, they take you right back up to around 8%. In other words, reversing 50, 70 years of downward movement on tariffs. It feels like Trump is taking the United States and the world into a new era.
I think that's right, Fareed, and it depends a lot on what he actually announces on Wednesday. There's a lot of uncertainty still about whether it will be applied to the whole world or to the 15 markets where we have the biggest trade deficits or some other lesser impact. But potentially we are moving away from the rules-based system that was embodied, as you said, in about 80 years of work on the international scene to create the GATT, to create the WTO, to create a series of rules that now more than 160 countries live by. And the U.S. is now going to potentially move into a world where we're doing everything on a bilateral basis. And one question is, how do the rest of the world respond? One, they'll respond by retaliating against us, but will they continue to follow the multilateral rules-based system, or will they too begin to do a series of bilateral deals? And will the work of the last 80 years basically be undone?
And it's worth pointing out that 80 years has coincided with enormous rises in global standards of living, prosperity, and in American standards of living. But tell me this, Mike. How much of this is, leverage that he is using to get at something? Because that's what a lot of his supporters, even Howard Lutnick, used to say. But increasingly, it feels like Trump really wants these tariffs. It's not just leverage.
I think it's more than that. He wants them for leverage. He wants them potentially for revenue. But first and foremost, I think he is quite sincere in wanting to transform the U.S. economy over the next 4 years into a much more manufacturing-based economy. And he sees tariffs as his primary tool to do so. Now, of course, increasing manufacturing in the United States is a goal that many presidents have had, including President Biden. But President Biden used issues like tools like industrial policy as well. And here, I think Trump believes that by putting up a wall of tariffs, he will force companies to move their production and move their supply chains to the United States. I think that's his first and foremost goal.
What do you think the likely result of all this is going to be? Assume again that there is some widespread application of tariffs. I think that's a reasonable assumption.
Look, you can't overrule the laws of economics with an executive order any more than you can overrule the laws of gravity. If you raise the prices on something, if you impose a tax, which is what a tariff is, on a product, it's going to be more expensive and people will buy less of it. And when you combine that lesser demand with what we're seeing in the decline of consumer investor confidence, you could well see a slowing of the economy more generally and more expensive products for consumers. This administration has said that consumer welfare is not necessarily their top priority. I think the Secretary of Treasury said cheap consumer products is not the American dream. That's a legitimate point to have. But the question is, how much are the American people willing to pay in terms of higher prices for everything that they buy? Autos could be $2,000 to $15,000 more per car in order to try and encourage this kind of production in the United States. And will it work? And just on that, Fareed, I think the president's style of putting tariffs on and taking tariffs off, the uncertainty around that has actually led companies to say, we're just going to wait and see how this all pans out, because these are very expensive decisions that take years and years. One thing that will be very interesting to see is that under globalization, the benefits of globalization were widely spread. Cheaper consumer products for Americans, and sort of invisible. But the costs of globalization were acutely felt by those industries that felt that competition, like steel. Here, the president's flipping this on its head So the cost of his approach will be felt by everybody. And the benefits may be felt by only a small number of workers in a small number of sectors. And it will be interesting to see politically how that pans out over the next few years, while it takes years for companies to reestablish supply chains and produce more in the United States if they're going to do so.
Mike, I only have 30 seconds left, but I do have to ask you, what about Canada? Do you even understand what the ask is for Canada? Because the Canadians, there isn't a lot of drugs coming through from the north. There aren't a lot of illegal immigrants coming from. I think Canadians are puzzled as to what exactly are they being asked. They signed a big trade deal with the last Trump administration, which he said was the best trade deal ever.
The Canadians are bewildered and are trying to figure out what they need to do to get out of the doghouse. There are long-standing trade issues here that even Canadians recognize should be dealt with. Things like their closed dairy market, their lumber market, which is very much, it goes back 200 years. We have a conflict with Canada over lumber, and these could be useful things to get fixed during these negotiations.
All right, Mike Froman, pleasure to have you on to sort this out for us. Thank you.
I love Tesla.
Which one did you buy?
Okay, Mr. President,
Which one did you
Mr.
buy?
President, which car are you going to buy?
The one I like is that one.
And how does this work?
And I want that same color.
President Trump joked about buying a Tesla. Meanwhile, can you afford a new car? On Sunday, President Trump told NBC News in a phone interview that he, quote, couldn't care less if his auto tariffs cause prices to rise because people will buy more American-made cars. Some of the president's supporters claim his tariff threats are nothing more than a negotiating ploy.
I feel like in some ways in the economy, this is kind of like a kitchen remodel or a bath remodel. There's a bit of a mess at the beginning, but everybody has a long-term look of where we're headed. It's going to be noisy for a little while, but we all know where we're headed, trying to reduce the prices for Americans and increase jobs.
Okay, bringing the group chat back. Look at your eyebrows. Kitchen remodel. Do you buy it? Because, by the way, if anyone's remodeled their kitchen, I haven't, but I have friends who've had, and they're still traumatized. Okay, it's a lot of pain.
Exactly. It feels more like taking your old house and then just ripping it all the way down to the studs and rebuilding it and trying to do that. And doing it with less money. What do you make of the way Langford was explaining it? Because, like, what is that messaging? I think that messaging is, he's like blinking in Morse code. Please do not actually do these tariffs. I think there's a lot of terror, and you can see the Wall Street Journal had a great story about this, where the automakers had this meeting with Donald Trump in which he basically said, make sure you keep your prices low. So when he says he doesn't care about prices, I think he does, but it's in contradiction.
It's not my gig to fix that. That's what they need to do.
It's what he's trying to say.
Okay, I know, Stephen, you have talked about whiplash, the uncertainty. What do you make of this general approach? Because I know the markets don't like it, because they just don't like not knowing what's going to happen. But how do you see this moment and him calling it Liberation Day and the way he's trying to talk about it?
You know, the damage that's being done is almost as much being done because no one knows what's going to happen. Trump says one day we're going to have reciprocal tariffs on everybody. The next day he says I'm going to let some countries off. That level of uncertainty hurts the markets. But more fundamentally, so there's nothing wrong, and it's quite laudable, the fact that the president is trying to respond to these areas of the country that were hollowed out by globalization. The question is the way to do that to recreate the economy of the 1950s a quarter of the way into the 21st century, when the economy is now not based on manufacturing, it's based on services, it's based on AI. Perhaps you use tariffs to promote AI industries.
All right,
of
now
the
you're
future.
getting ahead of where they are, though, because they're still talking manufacturing. Stephen brings up globalization, which I think for Democrats, like, the legacy of that lives on, right,
That's
in
right.
angry constituencies.
Yeah, and absolutely, there's a need for the industrial center of the country to get the support that it has to have to reindustrialize, to get the investments working for the workers there. But this is chaos. This is uncertainty. I'm thinking about it as let them eat cake day on April 2nd rather than Liberation Day. President Trump was not voted in to raise prices, but that's what's going to happen. 90% of global trade is going to be affected by these tariffs. There is no clear plan for how to get Americans to buy American cars now. Where did that come from? Where's the legislation for that?
So idea of what is an American-made car when so many foreign manufacturers here and so many parts come from other places.